Hey everyone, good to be back with you. Today's topic, will they try and assassinate Trump? The last couple weeks I've been seeing a lot of videos of people asking this question, will they try and assassinate Trump? I always find it interesting that we use the term they, and that may have something to do with the fact that during the Kennedy assassination, once the shots started coming into the car, Governor Connally turns around and says to Kennedy, "They're going to kill us all." Jackie says, "They've shot my husband." Then after the assassination, once she was headed to the hospital, when she was leaving to go back to get on the plane to go to Washington, they wanted her to change out of her pink dress that was splattered with JFK's brains. And she said, "No, I want them to see what they did to my husband." So I think that's where a lot of the they comes from. Just to take a historical perspective at this first, we've had 4 presidents assassinated, McKinley, Garfield, Lincoln, and Kennedy. There have been 10 other presidents where there have been actual assassination attempts, and of course there have been many, probably every president has had many death threats. So it's from an American historical perspective, it's not terribly uncommon, unfortunately, that we have assassinations, attempted assassinations, and a great many threats. And even if you look at world history, you'll find that it's part of life on this planet. People assassinate leaders. As far as they, generally, when you look at these assassinations, I mean, history doesn't lie. Generally, the people who are behind these assassinations are the aristocracy. You can go all the way back to Julius Caesar, and many before him and after him. It's a lot of times there are people in powerful places who, as in the case of Julius Caesar, the aristocrats around him believed that he wanted to assume total authority. Which he did. I mean, there was no question about that. And they, of course, disagreed with that, and they made the decision he had to go. Brutus, of course, his best friend, turned on him, and they stabbed him to death. Each one of them stabbed him, all 40 guys. Brutus shoved in the second knife. And it didn't seem to surprise Julius Caesar as this was all going down. They said he basically said nothing, very little. So, anyway, it's the historical perspective of assassinations of leaders. It shows us that generally the people who are pulling the strings, the aristocracies, the power people in power, are the ones generally behind it because they feel threatened. Their power feels threatened. Of course, it's always some patsy or someone who's set up to take the fall for the crime, who usually gets the blame, but usually there's powerful forces behind that person. You know, Lee Harvey Oswald said he was a patsy. There's a tremendous amount of evidence to suggest that he was telling the truth. But now, of course, there's also evidence that suggests that Lee Harvey Oswald was in some way involved in the plot. Whether or not he was part of the plot to assassinate Kennedy is hard to tell, because when they sheep-dipped Lee Harvey Oswald, we have so many different things that Lee Harvey Oswald did and said, it's hard to know which side. Some people say he hated Kennedy. Some people say he loved Kennedy. Some people say he was working as a double agent for the FBI, informing on the CIA, who he was also either working for or closely associated with. And a lot of people believe that he was conned into believing that he was part of an abort team, that maybe he thought that his mission there was to figure out what was going on and who was a part of an attempted assassination, and maybe he was supposed to report back to the FBI or CIA and let them know what was going on. This is a popular theory, that maybe he thought he was part of a plan to stop an assassination. But clearly, once he arrived at the Texas theater, and whoever it was that he was supposed to meet there didn't show until the cops got there, my guess is that's about the time that Lee Harvey Oswald figured out that he had been set up as a patsy. Clearly, there were other people involved in the Kennedy assassination. So let's talk a little bit about the assassination and the question people are asking: will they assassinate Trump? Well, that is a very easy question to answer. Of course, they would love to get rid of Donald Trump. I do believe that assassinations are the absolute last resort. I believe that they try everything they can to thwart a person like Trump or any leader who's not doing what they would like him to do. They try just about every tactic or strategy they can come up with to avoid having to take it to that length, because it's difficult to get away with it. You know, assassinating a president is easy, or assassinating anybody. I mean, professional marksmen, with the weapons that are available today, you can put a team of shooters a half a mile or even a mile away and assassinate a president or anyone, because you have the ability to shoot from a very, very long distance. So killing or assassinating a President Trump or anyone else is actually quite easy to actually do the killing. The hard part is to get away with it. Getting away with it is much, much tougher, because in order to do that, you have to be able to control the cover-up, which means you have to control the crime scene, the evidence, the witnesses, the investigation, and of course you'll have an autopsy, and you have all these things, all these elements of the crime that you have to be able to control. Now, in the case of JFK, I think there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that Lyndon Johnson was, at the very least, gave his thumbs up and stamp of approval. Many people believe, and I think there is sufficient evidence to suggest, that he was in fact part of the plot and may have even been one of the originators of the plot. Because LBJ, when they killed Kennedy, they needed at that point to control the evidence, the crime scene, the witnesses, and all these things. And so they really had to have someone who could do that, and that man was LBJ. Because once Kennedy is assassinated, LBJ becomes president, and now he can control all of these things. And we know from his actions in the hours immediately following the assassination, he did exactly that. So LBJ was very much a part of that. So if you look at the situation with Donald Trump, you have to ask yourself, do you believe that Mike Pence would be part of a plot? Because he would become the president and he would have to control the investigation, meaning controlling the witnesses, the crime scene, and all the evidence, and all these types of things. Now, I believe that Trump's pretty smart, and I think he took that into consideration. I think one of the major considerations he probably took into account, knowing that he was going to be taking on the establishment, was probably to make sure that he chose a vice president who he could trust, who wouldn't LBJ him. LBJ, of course, was facing a lot of issues. He was probably going to be kicked off the ticket in '64. Bobby Kennedy was working behind the scenes, not so subtly, but he was working behind the scenes also with Texas prosecutors to bring forth charges on LBJ, serious charges. And there was a lot of people in LBJ's inner circle who were under investigation, under indictment. So there was a lot going on with LBJ, and he also despised the Kennedys. He was a man who knew that once he was thrown off the ticket, that would be the end for him. He would never be president. So he definitely wanted to be the president. He didn't like being JFK's VP, that's for sure. And of course, it was easy for him to become part of this cabal, because he was going to give the defense industry the war in Vietnam. And that was a crucial part, I believe, is that Kennedy was going to deprive the military-industrial complex and the bankers their war in Vietnam, and the CIA, because they had an interest in Vietnam as well. So I think he was depriving these people of the war that they wanted, and LBJ would give it to them. And also he was talking about détente with the Russians, and so there was a lot of really hardcore anti-communists at the time who thought that Kennedy was weak. So there was a range of issues there that I think at some point the people who make those decisions probably had enough reason in their minds to go ahead and get the thumbs up. But I can tell you that it's my honest feeling that even if the CIA wanted Kennedy killed, even if the mob wanted Kennedy killed, I don't believe that they would have done that without LBJ. They had to know that if they pulled this off, that someone was going to have their back, that someone was going to be able to orchestrate the cover-up. And it's a good thing they did, because a lot of things went wrong in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. It was supposed to be Lee Harvey Oswald firing from the Texas School Book Depository, and that was supposed to be it. But of course, the shooting wasn't very good that day. The teams of shooters who were there missed quite a few of their shots. They hit Connolly. They weren't supposed to do that. They missed a lot of shots, and so the fatal head wound, which I believe there were 2 fatal head wounds there. I believe he actually did get hit in the back of the head, and just a split second later, he also got the shot in the right front. Hard to say where that shot came from. Maybe from the grassy knoll, maybe from the storm drain up by the picket fence and the overpass, or possibly, as some people have stated, possibly even down by the curb by the storm drain there. But it's almost irrelevant at this point where the shot came from. The fact is, the shot did not come from the rear, the one that hit him right here, and that would throw a wrench into the spokes of the original setup, which was that the shots came from behind, all fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. This is why they had to create the magic bullet theory, and this is why they've been holding back so much evidence. This is why they doctored video, doctored photos, confiscated film, and everything else. All part of the cover-up. So the bottom line is, yes, you can assassinate a president, but you've got to be able to get away with it. You've got to be able to control all that evidence. You've got to be able to control witnesses. So it's not an easy thing to do. Does that mean I'm suggesting it absolutely will not happen? No, because it depends on how high the stakes get. If the stakes get high enough and they feel it's their last resort, they will most likely make that decision at some point. So it is possible, but I do believe that they'll try every other strategy or tactic that they have prior to that. I think assassination is, again, it's easy to do the assassination, very, very difficult to control the cover-up, especially if the man who would be the man who's vice president, who would become president, is not part of the plan, because ultimately he will become the chief executive, and he will ultimately be in charge of the investigation and all that type of thing. So, yeah, the short answers, I think any president is susceptible to assassination. It's easy to do the assassination, hard to do the cover-up. But I expect that we'll see many strategies and tactics applied to Donald Trump in the next 4 years to try to neuter him, and assassination will be the last resort. But I don't think that you can ever rule it out. And they again, I believe they is the aristocracy, the power players, the people who control the money and the power in Washington and around the globe. And these people are highly unpredictable. They are psychopathic. They're pure evil. And they generally don't give up. And so we'll just all have to watch and see what happens, and hopefully this is something that we'll never have to deal with. Alrighty, so that's my thoughts on, will they assassinate Trump? We'll see. Y'all have a good one. Bye.